People from areas of deprivation get treated unequally on two levels. First of all, individually, they get treated differently and discriminated against, but also as a population, as a general group of people they're discriminated against. And it's important to recognise both levels of discrimination because both of them have huge impacts on the lives of people living in areas of deprivation. The stigma against poverty is what justifies people leaving people in poverty. For example, our former Taoiseach, I remember him running a campaign. First of all, he said that his party represented the people who get up early in the morning. And I remember laughing because I work in a hostel where lots of people are getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I said, I'm wondering, does he mean them? I don't think he did. He was implying that people who get up early and went to work. And so he wasn't representing those people who stayed in bed, implying those lazy people who stayed in bed and didn't work. He also then launched a campaign against social welfare cheats. And I remember seeing this big picture of him with this big banner saying, we are campaigning against social welfare fraud. And I thought this was ironic because I don't agree with social welfare fraud. But if you're asking what's affected our society, it isn't social welfare fraud that has really impacted our society. It's all the people who basically misused money that caused our financial crisis in 2007.
To me, socioeconomic discrimination is putting up barriers towards people, individuals or groups, based on their social class or their economic status. So in a nutshell, really what it means is judging people or discriminating against people based on where they come from, the clothes they wear, how they speak and the wealth that they have, which is all beyond their control because unfortunately we can't choose the life we are born into, the opportunities that we're offered.
I remember just as kids being from the flats, the way the police would come down and they'd be heavy-handed, they'd give you a box, and when anything would happen, the way they'd just come in, being really, really heavy-handed with people around here, and how we were kind of treated, like if I was with my friends going into shops and they don't let you in, and you still see that to this day, like kids going into an area and just that they're being othered, or people like have this fear of them. And even like where I became friends with people that was not from this area, just their parents wouldn't let me be friends with their children.
So people from low socioeconomic status will judge people from more affluent areas, and that's just because it's ingrained in you from when you grow up or where you grow up, and unfortunately it's a culture thing. So you're just seen as, when you come from low socioeconomic status, you see people from affluent areas as the posh people, the people with the money, the people that are going to judge you, you know. And then from the high socioeconomic status and the more affluent areas, see people from low socioeconomic status as the poor people, the people that are getting everything free off social welfare and all these things. And it's not out of malice, it's just about uneducation. It's uneducation and like a lack of, I suppose, cohesion between cultures. So if whatever side we're from or whatever area we grew up in, if we don't have that opportunity to, interact or, work together or learn from each other, well then how can we understand each other?
You have, the dogs on the street now, if you're going up to a pub, you're being refused entry once they hear the accent. You're ringing up for insurance quotes, you're ringing up to book for christenings, the accent, and people try to change their accent, but like you're changing a sense of your identity. Same even if you're booking for insurance online, you put your address, you're being disproportionately charged a higher premium on average.
As well as blaming people for being poor, we also blame them for the effects of poverty. So for example, homelessness is an effect of poverty. The vast majority of people who are homeless come from poor socioeconomic circumstances. Everyone says anyone can become homeless. Absolutely true. I know people who come from wealthy areas who are homeless, but they're really few. I work in homelessness. I rarely meet someone from a wealthy area who's homeless. If they are, it's generally from mental health difficulties. The vast majority of people in homelessness came from poverty. We still hold this individual sense that homelessness is an individual problem caused by individual deficiencies, failings. And yet we don't recognise that we're in Ireland at the moment where there's a housing crisis, and that at the same time as having a housing crisis, we have a huge surge in homelessness. It's obviously created by our economic circumstances, and that means it's our responsibility, homelessness. It's not individual responsibility.
So you have that individual aspect, but then you have the cultural bit, that there is people in Ireland that regionally that might have a regional accent, have that shared history, and you're discriminated, you're othered. So while now Dublin is getting more and more profitable, they see the Indigenous community as kind of like in the way of quote unquote progress.
You're born a traveller. This applies to you straight away. Discrimination and socioeconomic problems. Straight away, just because you're born into that community. And I've kind of carried that with me then the whole time, realising that you know, the first few steps for a traveller is going to be a lot harder than anybody else, you know. It is unfair. My own personal view on the whole thing is like the damage has been done to travellers in the Republic is from the state themselves, from 1963 onwards, and just all the acts and all the legislation they brought in to completely cripple us. So I actually left Manchester when I was 16 myself, lived in Manchester, got schooled over there, and so I was a little bit lucky in that sense, because all my friends now that lives in Finglas, Ballymun, Cabra, none of them could read and write, you know, to do all physical work, because they just weren't educated. But anyway, so I was just lucky in that sense that I was born in Manchester, lived there, got educated and came back. And then over time, then I was here a few years, and that Miscellaneous Act in 2001 was really when, it was just illegal then to be kind of live the traveller life. And that's when the alcohol and drugs for me took hold. So what the settled community went through in the 70s and 80s would have started with travellers in 01.
And they're discriminated on the fact that they are travellers, 87% less likely to get a job, even though they could have gone through the same college, did the same kind of, still qualified for the same kind of work, and less likely to get the job. So in an ideal world for me would be to try and make it mandatory for organisations to hire from all ethnicities.
So like we know that socioeconomic discrimination happens, but what does it do? What does it mean for people who experience it? And like I've done a bit of research with ATD, and this came out very strongly through the testimony of the participants, that being discriminated against on the basis of your socioeconomic status has real tangible effects. It's not just hurt feelings. It's lack of access to services. It's less access to the labour market. It's different treatment in restaurants and shops. It's different treatment in multiple processes and services. And so yes, it is about that sort of internal response to that treatment, but it also has real tangible economic effects for people.
And I know travellers that are doctors, solicitors, even a judge, and they can't say who they are. It's really, really sad that they have to oppress that part of themselves in order to get an education. My eldest son had to oppress that part of himself, and he felt like he did have to oppress a part of himself going to school in order to get an education. And still, when he got the education and got out, nobody wanted to hire him because of his ethnicity.
As a society, we've never acknowledged class as an issue. This will be one way of trying to capture class, including socioeconomic status. And yet class has often been at the heart of an awful lot of the very serious issues that this society has failed on. It's a small step. It's one that really needs to be taken. People have been seeking it for a very long time, and they really have to stop delaying on it and act on it now.
So in 1998, you had the equality legislation was put in, the Employment Equality Act, and it protected on 9 grounds. And then in 2000, you had then the equal status, so that was essentially protecting against discrimination on the 9 grounds and accessing goods and services. But one ground that was left out, even though there was recommendations that it should be put in, was the socioeconomic ground. So in a nutshell, that's basically discrimination on someone's class, that accent. So in 2016, there was kind of a resurgence to try and get this up and moving again by a group of what's kind of called the Alliance.
The 10th Alliance is a very important kind of alliance or network of organisations that all of which have seen the importance of socioeconomic status being a ground in equality legislation. So by coming together, we work into the strength of all the organisations, all their backgrounds and so on, all the experience and knowledge on the ground and the policy level that the organisations have. We've been able to bring that together through the Alliance and work together for change, hopefully with an outcome of making sure that socioeconomic status is authentic ground in our equality legislation. And it's very important in 2 ways. One, in that it acts in a way that people who are discriminated against based on those grounds currently can take a case or can try and get redress in terms of that discrimination. It has to be proved, of course. And a second most important piece, and it would be really important in terms of socioeconomic status as well, is it aims to kind of address the culture which enables that type of discrimination to take place.
There's a broader sociological question around, well, what enabling institutions do we need to develop alongside this legislation so that we're actually lifting people out of poverty?
We're an Indigenous community that lives in the inner city, and we're quite distinct from everyone else in that, like, if you look statistically, there's like people that come to Dublin and they stay in and around statistically for 2 to 3 years. They're not married, they're educated, they could be from all over the world, and they work in the multinational companies. So you might have people coming here to study English, but their average stay around is 2-3 years. And even the Irish society that do come and they might work and they commute from different parts of the country, their average stay is 2-3 years. But we're the Indigenous community. Like if you go to other countries, you'll have an Indigenous community in that we're here 4 or 5 generations. There is a small link then where you have some people from the traveller community that were put into the flats in and around the inner city as well. So that's that intersectional piece as well, where some travellers experience class discrimination, but they experience racism as well.
It's so easy to judge people that it's almost like moral judgment, that you are kind of like, you are in this situation because of yourself. So this is like, it means that you are lazy, you don't want to upskill yourself, so it's your fault. It's not that the system doesn't work really, it's like your fault, fully your fault. And like what it was said already, that if you hear this all the time, you just like, you know that probably you shouldn't ask for for jobs. You shouldn't go to college, to, for example, Trinity.
When it came to accessing work, the group that had the highest level of discrimination were people who were unemployed. And lots of people think, oh, if you don't have a job, it's because you were too lazy to get up off your backside.
Yeah.
When lots of people are looking for work, lots of people are not having any joy, lots of people are not hearing back from potential employers. And then that whole thing of, well, if you didn't find a job, okay, maybe we don't want to know you because you didn't find a job. So then not being able to do anything about it, and not being able to query it or challenge it is very disheartening for people as well. And then as Ireland kind of moves forward on equality strategies, if you're not included and named in those, you tend then to kind of fall off the table. If we're only going to look at these issues from an equality perspective, if you're not covered by one of the grounds, then your exclusion, your discrimination isn't even captured, it isn't discussed. So it's really important that the state's own laws and policies are telling it things aren't working.
Yeah.
So that's, for that reason, I just think it's a big gap that we need to address.
There's not a seat on the table to discuss facts. Oh, it's like, I can
It would be a huge symbolic victory, I think, too.
Yep.
And it would be an acknowledgement of class, which is, Rita said, is an often hidden thing. It has always been something hidden. It's always been present, but it's always been hidden. We don't talk about class in the Irish context in the way they do, for example, in the UK. So this would be a sort of a fulsome acknowledgement of the fact that class and socioeconomic status does potentially impact on what you can do and where you can get to in life, and that, you know, the government commits to protect it on that basis.
The symbolism is hugely important.
Yeah.
I often hear arguments about making changes or not, particularly often about the Constitution, the right to housing, the Constitution, sure, what difference does that make anyway, and so forth, make us feel that. I do believe in symbolism of law. I think it is powerful, and it gives you a basis for then further actions when that's embedded. And law often changes mindsets.
Yeah.
You know, things are often banned, but then they become socially unacceptable. So I think as a first step, get this into law, and over time I would be confident it would be unacceptable to discriminate on the grounds of socioeconomic basis. We do have an acceptable level of positive, I would argue, reduction. We know there are hundreds of thousands of people in poverty, and to my mind that it seems to be acceptable. It's acceptable by the state, it's acceptable by society generally. There's no marches on the street about poverty yet.
Some people think poverty is, oh, I actually can't go out on a Saturday night until I get paid next week or the week after from work. That's not what poverty is. Poverty is a child sitting through lunch because he can't afford to pay the €5, and these lunches are expensive now in secondary school. They were free in primary. That's what poverty is. So start while children are young and create a good foundation. and let them grow up and feel what it is to be equal and have equal opportunity.
To give you the simple facts, if you come from an area of deprivation, you will die 5 to 6 years younger on average than someone from a well-off area. Of that shorter life, you will spend almost twice as long with chronic disease. So you'll have a shorter, unhealthier life.
The danger in not doing so is we allow these vacuums to be created into which alienated populations drift. Okay? And like I said, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but we've seen that recently. We've seen alienated communities being co-opted by people with certain ideological perspectives who point at other unfortunate individuals and say, it's their fault. Okay? So the danger in not sort of recognising in the first instance socioeconomic status and then developing enabling institutions to lift people out of poverty is that we continue to allow alienated communities to drift into areas which are divisive ultimately for the state and for everybody.
I think it's really important to include it in equality legislation because it's so pervasive. There are so many people living in areas of deprivation who face discrimination on a daily basis. And I think that one of the first things it will do, it will enable people from areas of deprivation to recognise that they've been addressed by discrimination. Often people don't actually recognise this is happening. Some of you just don't see it. So, for example, they're not aware that there's discrimination against them. And for others, they actually have internalised the idea that they didn't deserve equal treatment because somehow they are lesser.
It's completely unjust that is not included. It's completely unacceptable, and it's been over 20-25 years now, a quarter of a century, that the legislation has been in place, and its socioeconomic status is still not included as ground for whatever reasons, and it's time for that to change. I think if people understood exactly how it's experienced by people and for the impact it has, people would understand why that needs to happen. So at a political level, really, it needs to change now. It's going on far too long. People are being excluded far too long and often blamed for these situations themselves, but it's the system. So it's just time. It's just unjust, and it needs to change right now.
I don't think it'd be a panacea that it will just solve things overnight, but it will give people in these communities a rights-based approach to attack and address the issues that's happening. So if it's to do with employment, you could have community centres around here. When they meet with employers, they're going to the table with a rights-based approach to be like, look, there is obligations under the Equality Acts. When employers are doing a policy on grievance policies or recruitment policies, they have to include a commitment to socioeconomic. So that would be a recruitment policy, but a retention of staff. It wouldn't just be on the 9 grounds. So that's that culture of compliance. If the government are taking people in jobs in civil service, you have that obligation as well. If the government has a policy framework on different types of equality grounds about what they're doing, strategies on traveller, strategies on gender, strategy on LGBT, with the equality, the socioeconomic ground is in, that there would be a policy on that, and all the rights-based approaches like ATD would be invited to stakeholder meetings about advancing that. And then even just for the normal Joe Soap, if he or she gets discriminated in work or goes into a pub, they then are aware then that they can challenge that, and that then empowers people to where at the moment people are just completely defeatist and acceptive now that like you walk into a place, there's nothing you can do. They know that they can do it on social class.
While people experience discrimination on socioeconomic grounds and other grounds, in private areas, access to shops and pubs and other areas in their lives and just on the street, in many cases, that it's also in relation to those public services they're accessing and how the law treats them, for example, in social welfare system and so on. So how the guards operate, how the prison system operates.
It will give people in these communities a rights-based approach to attack and address the issues that's happening. So if it's to do with employment, you could have community centres around here. When they meet with employers, they're going to the table with a rights-based approach to be like, look, there is obligations under the Equality Acts. When employers are doing a policy on grievance policies or recruitment policies, they have to include a commitment to social economic. So that would be a recruitment policy, but a retention of staff. It wouldn't just be on the 9 grounds.
I think it's hugely important from a health perspective. Access to health services is so important to address your health that if there's any discrimination against you based on socioeconomic status, that is, significantly injurious.
If you think about like colleges, schools, landlords, and employers, they probably would need to think twice before certain actions. So it's like, for me, it would be. I agree that it's just a start, but also like it could be a tool for practitioners and for I think so.
If, for example, we merged all schools, you just went to your local school, so that both people from wealthy areas and poor areas mixed together. People in the poor areas are much more likely to be motivated to go to college because they'd have other people who are going to college.
One of the things that I think needs to be addressed as a country, we put a huge store in third level, and that kind of equality is seen as everybody going to third level.
Yeah.
But I'd like to turn that on its head.
Yeah.
And have a lot of work that people do, maybe do through apprenticeship, or initiate themselves, or, that's also valued. Because everybody going to third level is equality. It's everybody trying to aspire to a particular worldview that is not inclusive.
Yeah.
And then there's lots of work that will be great to see done and done well, then doesn't get valued at all.
There's a thing called RPL, recognition of foreign learning. I know you're familiar with it, but I remember Nigel Foster's pushing for that. That is a very significant equality tool if it's used properly. I've hit all the arguments about how it's difficult to measure and administratively difficult, but there is a thing called RPL, recognition of prior learning. You actually give credit to people for the skills they've acquired during their lifetime. There are ways of equalising these things.
I do think it's about thinking about what we value again. Because at the moment we live in a sort of a market-based economy where all we value is work in formal paid employment that produces something, that grows the economy, whatever you'd like to say. And there's, we don't value care. We don't value mothers or fathers who care in the home. Even though that's such an important job, it's as important as any other job you care to name.
Yeah.
But it falls outside of the traditional sort of economic model that persists at the moment, and so it's not valued for that reason. So I kind of think, and you mentioned climate earlier, I don't think we can divorce this conversation from that either. We are in a transitionary phase at the moment, and we need it to be a just transition. And so social justice and climate justice are inextricably linked, and you can't have one without the other. And in order to have both, we do fundamentally need to have a conversation about, well, what do we value here? Because we can't keep going to where we're going. It's destructive to the environment, it's destructive to people, to society. So, what do we value here? Can we value and reward care work? Do we value and reward people who look after each other in the natural environment? Do we value and reward people who do craft work, or who are involved in music, or who are involved in art? So things like the UBI for Artists is an example of decommodifying art as a way to live a good and productive life. So I think there's a conversation to be had about, we need to think about what we value and how we revalue things that have been, assigned no value, when in actual fact they are quite valuable and quite important to us as a society as a whole.
We started our first GP training scheme to address, it's a training scheme to specifically train GPs to work in areas of deprivation and with marginalised groups. Marginalised groups are people who are homeless, people who use drugs, migrants, etc. After we started, they started one in Scotland, and then they started the Trailblazers in the UK and Heft. And now between Ireland and England, there's over 1,400 people in such training across the two islands. And since we started it, we've had the highest rate of application almost in the country. We're in the top 2 consistently. And I think it's because young people do want to make a difference. We did a lot of work around stigma. So a lot of the work I do around teaching is addressing stigmatizing attitudes. And the way we address stigma is in 2 ways. We talk, we do lectures on stigma, address it. But then we also use what's called the contact approach. The contact hypothesis is that the only way to really address stigma is through meaningful contact. So In their 4th year, our trainees have to spend a day a week for 4 months working in drug services, where they're working as a GP with people who use drugs. And we give them projects such as, we want to spend a day where you just talk and get their story, not their medical story, just their story, so as they can get to know them as a person. They also have to spend a day a week for 4 months working with homeless people, and the same with migrants and prisoners. And we constantly bring people in from patient representative groups or community representative groups to interact with them, so as to break down stigma. And then we also give them the skills to manage chaos, the skills to manage drug addiction, the skills also to manage, for example, particularly if you're working with people who use drugs, you have to manage, and people who've had trauma, you have to manage trauma-produced challenging behaviours. So we give them the skills. So we're both giving them a vision and mission to work in areas of deprivation and the skills. And as I said, this seems to have improved engagement. The one thing we didn't do is it didn't start new practices, and that's why we set up this other organisation called GP Care for All, and that organisation sets up GP practice in areas of deprivation.
Being a person that has come from low socioeconomic background and being able to break down barriers and obstacles myself to get to where I am now, you know, for me I think it's really important for that visibility. It's that visibility of being normalised. Now I'm a researcher here in DCU, and yeah, if I still live in Dublin 17, so I walk down the road and I'm still walking around the area that I come from, and I could walk up to a guard and the guard would still see me if I'm in, me regular skivvies, me tracks bottoms and whatever, straight away it's like, well, what are you doing here? Where'd you come from? All this stuff. Yeah, I'm being judged because of where I live. Why am I being judged based on where I live? Do you know what I mean? They don't know me. They don't know what I do. If I say, oh wait, actually I do research in helping people progress out, in education and all this stuff, or sometimes I could turn around and say, oh yeah, I work in DCU, and they'd be like, you do? It's kind of like that judgment of how you come from Darndale. How do you come from Darndale and do that? I taught students before, and like that we went in and they were like, was giving them the background, and I said where I was from, and they were like, no you're not. How could you be a teacher and you come from Darndale? They were like, you must live in Blackrock or something. I was like, no I don't. I know your brother and I know your uncle and I know your, and it's like that judgment of you can't be in a certain position if you come from a certain area, and it's wrong, on so many levels. But also, as I said, you can get judged based on where you live and how you dress or what you look like at that time or how you speak. So as you can see, I'm quite common and I don't have the best grammar or pronunciation. See, there you go. I don't have the best pronunciation. However, that's just obviously from the way I grew up and where I grew up and all that kind of stuff, but that's me. And when I first began teaching, I used to hide that, and I used to try to speak a certain way and act a certain way when I was in certain situations or around certain people, until one day somebody said to me, why? And I was like, because they'll judge me, or I sound really common. And they're like, you don't sound common. You have a North Dublin accent. You are from North Dublin. Do not ever cover up who you are, because that's who you are. And then when they said that, I kind of went, I never want to hide who I am again, because yeah, I am from North Dublin. I'm not ashamed to be from North Dublin. I'm very proud of where I am after coming from what I've came from. Do you know what I mean? So it's to allow that be normalised, that you don't have to speak or act or be a certain way to be in a certain position. You just have to be you. And people will either accept you for who you are or they won't. But people that are not worth your time won't accept you. And the people that are worth your time won't care how you speak or what you look like or what you're doing. And you have to kind of realise that and have that confidence, build up that confidence of it doesn't matter. You just be you, and people will either accept you or not. And that's a hard one, and I think especially people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, that's a very hard one to, I suppose, encompass, because it's so ingrained in them that they're put down so often, or they have to hide where they're from, or they can't say, oh, I'm coming from Coolock, or I'm coming from Tala, or they can't say they're coming from those areas, in that fear of rejection. And that rejection is built up, and when you build up that rejection, you start building up those barriers of how you hide yourself, and we become so hidden we're forgotten about who we are. I just think it's very important to realise that we do need to give people that confidence and give people that care, that you should always be yourself, no matter what other people think, because without being yourself, you'll never truly be happy, you'll never truly be who you are. And that's why I think getting the 10th round added would be really important, because again, it gives that visualization to people that yes, be who you are, you cannot be discriminated against that. Don't be afraid to say, I come from this area. Don't be afraid to wear whatever clothes you want to wear. You know what I mean? You should be who you want to be.
Bacon barriers, bacon barriers in my house, bacon barriers, bacon barriers in my house, See, discrimination's been part of the key, but to have a good life, it's a priority. Keep your hands up, keep your head on the road. No need to be out in the cold all the time.